Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. You see in the screen here with me and Stefan, we will introduce you to the new updates on the freshly published 2701. Just a quick view on the agenda. We will do some basic baselining, some general consideration before we actually will dive into the standard. There has been already a presentation also on the 2702. We will quickly refer to that one because there's a lot of items to see in that webinar. It might be interesting to catch up with that one. And then, of course, the main topic of today is to look into the updates that in the main standard will be available. And also, Stefan will discuss a few of the topics, what after the updates, what to do in case you have existing implementations, existing certifications, and some general feedback on how to approach that one. But first of all, let me introduce ourselves a bit. The purpose is that, first of all, we are both PCB trainers. I've been working on a lot of work on the ISO implementations, teaching courses, and so on. So you can have a look afterwards after the webinar on that one. I'll leave it up to you, Stefan, to introduce yourself. Here we go.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Glad to have so many people joining us for this webinar on the new 27001. So I divide my time, about 50% of the time I'm still in the field implementing ISO 27001, doing work as a data protection officer. The other 50% of the time I do audits for 27000 and 9000, and TISAX also. And I also do trainings for PCB on Lead Implementer and Lead Auditor. ISO 27001. So that's me. I'm looking forward to, together with Peter, bringing you some insights in this update of the standard.
Good. Let's get started then. Here we go. So, Stefan, it's up to you. So start the story, right?
Good, I will. Thank you, Peter. So finally, it has arrived, this long-awaited update of 27001. We knew the previous version was already from 2013, which I think in ICT world, that's really a long time ago. So we were hoping for a while to get a decent update. As you see, there were some smaller updates in 2014, 2015, and 2017. But those were not really changing anything into the requirements or controls. It was mostly wording, small changes. Also, not all accreditation bodies adopted these versions. So in some countries like Germany, you have the 2017 on your certificate. In others like Belgium, it's still 2013 version, which was also a bit confusing. But now we're happy it's there. It finally arrived. We expected it before the summer. It came a bit later. But now that it's here, we're all looking forward to implementing the changes and going through the transition, on which I will talk a little bit later as well. What's 27001? The idea is still the same. It consists of management clauses, the chapters 4 to 10, and the normative control annex coming from 27002, which are now the controls added to this update, and which was also the main reason to update the 27001, as the 27002 was already updated. The management clauses, it's when we audit, we often see that organizations forget about these clauses. It's not only the annex that is relevant with the controls, but you have this high-level structure. It's a harmonized structure. It's the same for all ISO standards which are certifiable, or almost all. It has these 10 chapters that you need to implement. And the core is really coming from the mother of all standards, which is ISO 9001. Where you have this continuous improvement process as main focus there for customer satisfaction, and these same principles are then translated within all the other standards, in this case, towards improving your information security management in your organization. Everything's based on this Plan, Do, Check, Act, the PDCA cycle, which is the principle of continual improvement. You look, okay, we have these 10 chapters that you see in the figure, starting with leadership, looking at, okay, what do we want to achieve? How are we going to plan our system? From the outside, you look at the context of the organization. What can have an impact on our ability to achieve our information security objectives? This could be issues internally and externally, like legislation, like ransomware, attackers attacking you from the outside, as expectations you have from interested parties like your customers, government bodies, your employees, your suppliers, partners. All of that you use to plan your system. Once you have it planned, you can run it, you support it, you make sure you have the right resources and people and tools in hardware, software. Once you have it up and running, you check it, you look at KPIs, you have to prove that your management system is effective. There where you see, okay, we're not meeting these requirements, you implement improvement, and this is a continuous cycle going on. And in the next slide, you will see you will always improve over time. And having this management system, having implemented the standard, is a bit your safeguard that you're not rolling backwards and over time. So just having the management system, implementing it, having it work, having it do its thing, setting your objective and improving in this manner, and then let's say third parties, certification bodies coming to check if you are still on this upward path to improve your information security within the organization. We had the requirements on one part, and the second big part is this Annex A. It was the 2013 version before. It changed now to the 2022 version, which was already a couple of months ago that it was released. So that made that the 27001 also had to upgrade. They make a reference to this 27002, and they put all of these controls into a table at the end of the standard, where you can see what is expected of you in the now 93 controls. So you have to implement these controls to prove that you're having your information security system under control as you deem them applicable. All right.
Yeah, there was another reference also to the 613, Stefan, you wanted to mention. So it's not only important that you do something like with the ISO 27002. By the way, you can also use other controls or other frameworks to do so. But one of the important things, as you also mentioned in this slide, is that the necessary controls need to be evaluated, and you also mentioned this one in that sense. So that there's a direct link also in the risk treatment here, right?
Yeah, that's very important. We often see people when they implement the standard and they have these controls in the annex. You make a statement of applicability where you will say, is the control applicable or not? Why is it applicable or why is it not applicable? It's not, you really have to make sure that you had a good look at these controls. When you do your risk assessment, you have your risk, you define, do we need to put a control in place? And then it states here specifically, compare the controls determined in your risk assessment above with those in Annex A to verify that no necessary controls have been omitted. And that's important. The idea is that you implement almost all of them. And it can be that you choose not to implement some of them, but that should be really limited. It depends. If you don't have any development activities, okay, then you can take the ones related to development out. But the moment you have it, they should also be implemented. And that's why they really want you to make sure you didn't omit any of them. Is it the only framework that you can use? No, you can also look at other frameworks, other controls that you can implement on top of that, but make sure that there is a clear link with these controls in Annex A and a clear justification of each of them, why they are included or not. And that's something a lot of times we see that they said, okay, this we're only going to do in 1 year or 2 years or in 3 years. That's not really the idea. You should try to implement as much as possible of them related to your risk assessment and your activity.
Very important, that one also is, please be aware that an ISO system is also a growing system. It can grow in maturity. So in many cases, as Stefan mentioned, it can take time actually to build a system. The important part here is think about the risks, make sure it's implemented, plan the budgets, plan the implementation plan, execute it, and then re-evaluate the system, which we will cover later on in the implementation. And a very important part document to support this implementation, as usual for the 2701, is a statement of applicability. So this is one of the mandatory documents that will be included in the certification scope and then with the documentation of your certification, so as a mandatory document in that sense, right?
Yeah, correct. And so here now you see again a repetition a bit, but this table A is directly derived from the 27002. The difference is in 27002 there's more explanation. There's more detail to each control. Here in 27001 you just have the control and the control goal. That's it. If you want more information, go to the 27002 where each of these controls is explained in more detail with also the labels on it to what it's related within information security, something Peter will touch a bit later as well. All right, I think now.
Yeah, one of the important things to mention also, Stefan, which lots of IT people implementing the 2701 make a mistake in, is that security is not only technology, right? So this is still the process, and it will be even worse, or it will be even more clear in the new standard that actually security is people, process, and technology, and we need to find a balance in that one. And you will also see, which we will discuss later on in this presentation, that the new organization of the document will not only have people, process, and technology, the typical PPT, but now we will go to 3P, the triple PT, because there will be a separate section for physical. So not only people, process, and technology, but also the physical is now more present. Although that the A11, as you probably know, the physical controls were there already, it will get a more prominent place actually in the new standard, which has been discussed also in the webinar on the 2702. This is also the main reason why we have seen the 2701 updated first, because the annex, of course, is the most important block to implement. So earlier this year we had the 2702. Now, after the midsummer, we had actually the update on the 2701. So, right.
Yeah. And I think
let's go
now. Let me say one more thing. I think also now with this grouping towards physical, people, process, and technology, it makes it a lot easier when you do your risk assessment and you want to see, okay, what do I have to mitigate? Do I have to mitigate the physical problem? Is it something with knowledge with the people? Is there something wrong in my process, or does my technology needs improvement? And now you can find these controls much easier if you think like that, because it's a more natural way of thinking when you do your risk assessment. So that makes, for me, that makes the standard more readable, more usable to implement it in combination with your risk assessment.
Yeah, that's one of the topics we will come back at the end of session, because on the other hand, some people like the logical implementation. You remember from the old standard that we had specific topics on HR, on application development, on legal part, network security, IT security. So ISO has implemented a different way of working on that one, but the grouping is simplified in that sense. And the good news is also there is some mapping to the old standard available, which is a nice table in the 2702. But we will come back to that one, how to use it then later on in this session. Right. Just a quick wrap up, Stefan, for the 2702.
Yeah, for the 2702, you had this. There was a webinar that PCB already did to make the link between the two of them. That's something you can look at for more reference, and also how the new 27002 will affect the 001. The biggest effect, of course, is you have to make the transition. If you're certified today, you have to make the transition to the new standard. For that, you have some time. You have 3 years time from the date it was published. So that will give you enough time to add these new controls that Peter will talk about in a minute. And from a certification perspective, it cannot happen tomorrow. Now the certification bodies have 6 months time to adjust the accreditation bodies, sorry, have 6 months time to define the rules for the certification bodies. Once the certification bodies get these rules, and I'm talking about training, auditor qualification, audit scheme, you have these new controls. The reports need to be adjusted, and then in theory they have also 6 months. So in worst case it should be a year, but the expectation is that by the summer, beginning of the summer next year, we can certify, or most certification bodies can certify to the new standard.
Good. Yeah, what has been in it in the 2702, as you probably have seen also in the previous webinars, one major change is that instead of having 14, so from the A5 to the A18, 14 functional groups. Remember, we had some policies, we had some HR items, we had some development items, legal, incident management, business continuity. You will notice right now that actually we will shift from 14 groups into 5 main groups, or actually 4 to be honest, and there are some introduction chapters also. The 4 main groups, as we discussed, the triple PT, so the process and policies, organizational level, the people management, rather the HR group, which you knew before. The physical one, A11, so there is a very tight mapping with the new A7 versus the A11 from the previous one, and of course the technological part, which we all know as the IT implementations of the measures. Just a reminder on that one, it's very important to know that we had 114 control items, so measures to be audited and to be implemented in the 2013 version. Strangely enough, we only will have 93 left, but very important to know that in essence no controls have been removed, so you don't need to kill the existing implementations. What rather happened is that they combined a few of these controls, and multiple controls rather, into a single item, simplified item. So we ended up with actually 93 right now, and you will also notice that the third level of detail that has been available in the old standard 2013 version is gone. So we have 5 main groups with a few subgroups, actually directly the policies and the requirements defined on the second level. To make the bridge between the current version, so 2022 versus 2013, or the other way around, we can actually check that one in the table B1 and B2 in the ISO 27002, which helps you to translate the current implementations versus the future or the 22 version implementation. We will come back to that one at the end, because one of the practical implementations on that one and how to handle your statement of applicability. Very important to know, not only we have been reducing from 114 controls to 93, strangely enough, there will be also 11 new ones to implement. It should not be a surprise, because in many implementations, they are already implemented one way or another. And the main topics that you will see appearing in these 11 new updates is actually cybersecurity, cloud security, and data protection, obviously due to cyber attacks, to the implementation, the continuous implementation of cloud solutions, and of course to the upgrade of lots of global implementations of data protection legislation. So in many cases, these are already implemented, although that some of them might be strange or might be worrisome for some some companies. For example, threat intelligence. So you need to detect what are the typical threats to your environment, what is posing risks actually to your environment. So you need to set up an intelligence collection plan in that sense. On the other hand, we have ICT readiness for business continuity, which is more or less a derivative. So it has been derived from the A17 business continuity already before. So there's a very strong alignment also with existing standards. And of course, a few of these items directly relate to data protection or privacy legislations like the 8.110, so the information deletion, data masking, the 11 and 12, the data leakage prevention, and so on. Also very important, it has been there already before, secure coding will be mentioned separately. So the secure coding practices were already available in the 13 version, although not explicitly. The securing guidance, securing best practices for development were already there, and but now they will get special attentions in that 8.28 item in that sense, right? But what I wanted to point out today is I don't know if you have checked the details of the clauses itself, the annex and the measures, but there has been an update also in the way actually that they try to explain the topics in that sense. And the good news is more practical, less passive language. So there's more active language, what you should do. So it's more clear in that sense what is expected. So in many cases, the topics have been simplified to be more clear in that sense. One important change also is, and you need to compare the text to find out in many cases, is that actually the term employee or employee has been changed to staff in general, due to the fact, of course, that many companies do not only have internal employees employed, but also external employees, interims, people working with an external contract at the company. So they changed the titles and the terms in that sense to be broader implementation, broader interpretation in that sense. And of course, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, a special focus on cyber and cloud security, data protection, and a special item, of course, still is physical security, right? In that sense, Stefan, we will go into the ISO 27001, so the major change of the audit standard itself. So I'll leave it up to you. Here we go. So one of the first things is the big changes.
Yeah, what do we have on changes? Oh, interesting enough, we have a name change of the standard. We have some document structure changes where they aligned it a bit more with the high-level structure. Some key changes in the main clauses, and then, like Peter already mentioned, language and content, of course, also changed when they bring out a new standard. Now, what was the name change? And that's interesting. If you see the old version, it was information security, security techniques, information security management system requirements, and now they finally bring in information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. Now, with the cloud security on the cyber side and the 3 clauses on data masking, information deletion, and data leakage protection, you really see that they went a step further down. You have to prove more that you're also doing something on cyber part and on the data privacy protection with the GDPR and other privacy legislations worldwide has become more and more important to handle.
One important thing, this does not undermine the PIM system. So the PIMs, as in 27701, what you will see, there are some basic measures implemented in the 27701 to be more ready for the privacy implementation. So there's still a reason for existence for the 27701, and very likely we will discuss also later on. The 27701 will need some updates to align with the new versions of the ISMS or the 27001 in essence, right?
Yeah. Also, if you look at the table of contents, you will see that the level 3 display is now more visible. They aligned it more with the high-level structure that is used for all ISO standards. So also when you integrate like 9000 with 27001, it's more natural to integrate it because the structure has been more aligned than it was in the past, which makes it a bit easier. That's a good change, I think. It makes it sometimes also a little bit more clear in the new one than compared to the old one. Surprisingly enough, the old version had 23 pages of content, and now we only have 19 pages of content, so they went a little bit more specific. Also, of course, because you only have 93 controls instead of 114, but still none of the content really was omitted from the old one. So they condensed it more, took out some doubles to make sure that it's more readable. You don't have double controls. Everything now is more set to be more useful in implementation phase. All right. So what's the content updates? Well, like I already said, the alignment with the ISO directive around high-level structure. The original 27001/2013 was one of the first standards to be aligned with the high-level structure at that time. Now we're nine years down the road, so there were some changes in the past on the high-level structure. Now it's again fully aligned with that directive. The day this one is published, it cancels all of the previous versions, including the technical corrigendas we talked about, the 14, the 15, and the 17 version, which some countries used and other countries did not use. That was a decision by the accreditation bodies. We sometimes had some issues for clients say, yeah, but you still have 2013, it should be 2017, but not all countries adopted these corrigenda, which made it also a little bit strange sometimes. But now that's fixed, everybody will go on the 2022 version. It is aligned with this harmonized structure, which is the high-level structure. You can find some information on that through that link once you get the presentation to give you a little bit more insights in the background of that. Okay, Peter, you can move on. Important, Peter already mentioned it in the beginning, and I'm always surprised that when I go audit, I sometimes still see organizations that only focused on the annex, only on the controls. Please don't forget that there are also requirements from clauses 4 to 10 that you also have to implement and that you cannot even exclude. You can still say that some of the controls are not applicable, but you cannot exclude any of the clauses from chapter 4 to 10, which are really the standard. The controls are the annex, but the actual standards are these clauses from 4 to 10 that you really have to implement to be able to certify to the standard.
It's quite important to know that these clauses are all about the PDCA, so the Plan, Do, Check, Act, and the continual maintenance and the continual improvement actually of the system. So this is a very clear statement from the ISO that you should implement actually that cycle and keep your system maintained over the years, and that will not change actually in the future. So.
No, and also your risk-based approach to risk management, planning of your management system is all in these clauses. All right, if you look at terms and definitions, in 2013, they made reference to the 27001, 27000 itself. You can still download that for free. It's a publicly available standard through this link. You can download it, see what terminology is used. In the 2022, there's an addition where they also make reference to the terminology databases that are maintained by ISO and IEC. And also here we put the links in the presentation to have that you can have a look there. Okay, what terminology is also relevant within this new 2022 version.
Please also be aware that other additional standards linking to the 27000 or using the 27000 principles, like for example privacy, also the cybersecurity standards, also the 27100 series cyber documentation will refer to that one. So this is a major change also to centralize the glossary and the terms and terminology being used. Right.
Peter, up to you.
Good. Yeah, there are some updates, and now we will deep dive a bit, or actually check for the changes and in the clauses itself. And for example, clause number 1 is the context of organization. Please be aware that the PDCA cycle started off with the analysis or understanding the organization itself before we move into the management accountability. So it starts with clause 4, but by the way, if you ask where is clause 1, 2, and 3, this is also part of the harmonized standards, meaning that the introduction to the standards, the references to the other documents actually are covered, and the glossary, as Stefan discussed just a second ago, are mentioned in the clauses 1 to 3. So actually the standard itself only starts at clause 4. Very important that the update is added to the 4.2, the interested parties. So it's extremely important that the interest and the influence actually of the interested party, it will get more emphasis in the new standard. So this is one of the clear signals that the implementation of an ISMS, information security management system, should be really result-based and the effectiveness of the system. So in that sense, ISO tries to disencourage actually the checklist approach in that sense. Second thing is that also the ISO 27001 has been brought closer to the process approach of the 9000, which is also covered in the 4.4. So the ISMS system itself, so the document checklist is not that important, but actually focusing on the processes, which is typically discussed in the 9000, by the way. So the results on that one is quite important. So this is a major change, a very important focus actually of the systems, right?
If I can just add one example on this first slide, where we really, as from an auditor perspective, we will really look at this interaction of processes. One simple example to explain is, for example, an NDA document. Often an NDA document is something that happens in the pre-sales or sales phase. You sign an NDA with a client or a supplier or a partner where you're going to do something together. And we often see that this NDA remains in that process, in the sales process. But there could be relevant information in an NDA that's also I need to know for people in the operational processes. With this clause, we will look more on, okay, how did you do that within your organization? Somebody signed an NDA at some point. How did somebody look at it if there is an operational impact? And how then did you translate the requirements in the NDA into your organization? That's a good example of this new requirement where we look for this interaction of the processes within your ISMS. So make sure that you always have this drill down through the organization, through the different processes to ensure compliance to the standard.
And for example, the NDA will impact the transfer of information. So once you set up sharing, for example, with external parties or suppliers, it's extremely important that in the transfer process, when you transfer information, that NDA is checked, that you also check afterwards in the life cycle that once the NDA is not valid anymore or the identity is being removed, that you actually determine what needs to be done when the contract, for example, is ended in any cases. So this is a perfect example that actually you will run through all these items throughout the entire ISMS system. Right? One of the important things also in ISO 27001, as Stefan already mentioned, is risk management. Please be aware that risk management is mentioned twice. It still is the same in the new standard in module 6 for the planning part and module 8 for the execution or the operational part in that sense. So in essence, also here you will notice actually that in the 6.2 clause there are two new items. So there will be a demand and a requirement to be more closely monitored. So, and second thing is to be more practical. So it should be available as documented information in practice. This was one of the key items actually to support your ISMS. So the risk management is really one of the key items and the key assets actually of your ISMS system, again to avoid that compliance checklist approach, but rather practical. These two have been actually added to that one. And very important also, keeping aware there's a new one popping up, and that's the 6.3 planning of changes. So you need to keep track of it. You need to plan out. You need to be aware that actually in change of systems, in updates of your system, or implementation of new items in the company that you should think about risk. So this is also a very clear signal that actually you should think more actively in risk management in this sense, right? In the 7.4, so the 7 is a support item, 7.4 more specifically, there was some sort of fluffy mention in the E item, so the process by which communication shall be affected. In essence, you see here, this is one of the examples where the more administrative language has been skipped. Actually, the combination of the ancient or the old D and E item has now been compressed into one. Very simple, clear communication is required, and you should define how to communicate. So whatever means you have, whatever platform is feasible to your audience should be implemented. But this is a clear example what is expected actually from the communications, and what you might also see in many of the ISO courses. So information security is not only about technology, but also about soft skills in the sense of communications, awareness, training. So this is a part, very important part for all the items in your ISMS system, is to mention that one.
Okay, and to add one small thing to that, when you talk about internal and external communication, think broad enough. Think about freelancers, contractors. Think about audience on your website. Think about users of your SaaS platform, for example. So think broad enough when you talk about communication, so that we see it in privacy policies and responsible disclosure policies, terms and conditions. That information security really is part of all the communication that you do. It could be even on your website that you have your information security policy in, let's say, a customer-facing form, also on a website. To think, how do I communicate with interested parties, for example, that you think broad enough there when you have this communication control requirement.
And this ties, links in very tightly to the context of an organization, as we mentioned earlier on the previous slide. So have an analysis, an overview of your stakeholders, so your interested party in that sense. So as Stefan mentions. The other one I mentioned also before is the module 8 on a high level, operating the system. And in essence, for example, the 8.1 is operational planning and control. You see actually that the organization of this item has been split up into some clear items, and very important also that you see some changes in terminology being used. So what has been called outsourced processes now has been mentioned as externally provided processes, and of course this also tightly links into the approach into cloud and into cybersecurity. In essence, what you also will know, and I can link it back also to some changing legislations globally and worldwide, and more specifically, for example, in Europe, you will find out that many cyber legislations and trying to increase security of platforms will require a more advanced control of supply chain, and this is a clear hint in that sense. Also, that the practical implementation is quite important, and even more important in the new standards. So you see the highlights actually that ISO tries to make here in many cases, right?
Also one example here, and this comes a bit also from the high level structure. ISO 9001 had this wording already a long time. So here, externally provided processes is much more than only outsourced processes. Here you have to look at all your suppliers that can have a possible impact or relevance to your information security. One example, really simple, is your cleaning crew. If you have an external cleaning company coming into your offices, cleaning your offices, maybe cleaning your secure areas, think about that. Think, what can they see? Because then you need to make some agreement, some arrangement with them, so that they understand also what a security incident could be, or a security event. And that's a bit what we will again look at as auditors. How did you make sure that these externally provided processes, and that can be services, can be products, can be a lot of things, how did you embed them also in your information security process to not forget them, and to make sure that also there you control them? And we will be looking for that control on these processes.
So the ISMS in that sense is more and more looking into an ecosystem of information security. So it's not an internal system only anymore in that sense. So, and this is matching the reality as it is right now. So we will see what changes in the future. But good. One important thing, and you have noticed also in the 9 series, so the performance evaluation. More specifically in the dashboarding, in the metrics. You notice also here that the language has been more clear. Very important that you need to provide evidence. So the system is focusing more and more and more on evidence-based implementation. So it's quite important to do so. And very important, you see also in the new version, the second clause or the second paragraph actually of the 9.1 is that it points back to effectiveness. And this is certainly important for information security implementation. So the effectiveness, the results-based approach, again, has been put in here. And again, as Stefan mentioned, also the alignment of the high-level structure and the harmonized structures is very clear also in the 2022 versions in that sense, right? Same thing. It's the same thing for the internal audit and management review. You want to add something, Stefan, to that one?
Yeah, to the regard to the monitoring, I do a lot of different kind of companies, from very small to very large organizations. Of course, if you're a larger organization, you often have more tools to give you some, let's say, some performance indicators on your management system. But try to make sure that you think about how you can show us the effectiveness of your management system, and that can go from the time that people got their information security awareness training on the moment that they onboarded to, for example, I don't know, your risk score in Office 365 in your security dashboard. So look for measurable topics that you can show us, prove us that your management system is really effective. Good.
Yeah, and that dashboarding, of course, many tools will help you out. It can be even simple Excel sheet in that sense, but yeah, dashboarding is extremely important. Also, one of the things that you might have noticed is also, for example, trend analysis. So in the internal audit and certainly in the management review, there's a very important report, or actually the requirement also in the implementation for the management, is that you should show and should document or provide evidence of trend analysis. So that you know what way you're going, what is the improvement, what is, or actually if it's getting worse, that you can actually take countermeasures in that sense. In the internal audit, so that's 9.2 clause, and the 9.3, there's not a lot of change on the level of content, although that it was one single chapter. Right now you will see that actually they have been split up, so there's an additional level in the clauses. So we will split up the internal audit items in general, and in an internal audit program it has been there already, but it has been split up now in a few items in that sense. So there's not a lot of change content wise, but it is to simplify and to align again with the high level structure of the audit standards, and again mainly on the ISO 9001 to align on that one. And of course these are very important to integrate to each other. One important thing is the clause 10, Stefan. I think this one is a change, although that the content again has not changed, but this is a remarkable one, right?
Yeah, the good thing here is, again, they harmonized it with the high level structure. They put continual improvement first, and that's the idea, to continually improve the effectiveness and adequacy of your information security management system. And how do you do that? By responding to non-conformities and taking the correct corrective actions. So you are pushed more to really show us this continual improvement. Year after year it needs to get better. Try to focus on that. Try also, and that's always a difficult point, is to identify these non-conformities. That's a typical ISO element, non-conformities and corrective actions. And we see a lot of companies struggling with that, how to log it, how to show us that you did a root cause analysis, how to show us that you implemented a corrective action, and also important, how you show us that you evaluated the effectiveness of the action. That's something to think about. And non-conformities can come out of security incidents, they can come out of internal audits, external audits, audits by your clients, weaknesses that you detect. So make sure that you have a good, this PDCA circle, that it's visible, that you can show it, that you take these actions and deal with the consequences of a non-conformity in a correct way, to in this way continually improve your management system.
And it is one of the typical criticisms also for the ISO 27001. It's not always capable of protecting you against attacks, but you can't protect 100% against any attacks in that sense. But it's way more important that you know how to react to it and to improve the systems to prevent reoccurrence. So that's a major focus, and as a closure of the PDCA cycle in that sense. So that's a very important part of the process to start improving and to reevaluate your system. Right. Good. We had some other considerations also, Stefan. So yeah, there are a few items that we wanted to check. As I mentioned, and you might notice, and it might be interesting to analyze also the 2702. The text has been less administrative. It has been more practical, more directive in that sense. And as we already mentioned and proved already, so they tried to make it more practical, rather effective results, so results-based and evidence-based, to prove for various reasons actually the system isn't working. So the PDCA cycle must prove its existence. You must prove actually it works. And yeah, one of the main critics, except for the cyber attacks, is also of course ISO 27000 in many cases considered as a compliance checklist. So this approach, this new change, should minimize that impact and actually force you to think evidence-based, to build the system evidence-based, and as Stefan mentions, to provide evidence on these objectives, dashboarding, and so on. So that's a very important part of that one. One of the typical issues you might see that, yeah, we moved from 14 control groups, so the 4 main annex items, measure items, into 140 controls. And the original 2013 approach in the logical and the functional organization. Now we move into the PPT or the triple PT approach, as Stefan mentioned. From a implementation perspective, it's quite interesting because we have less groups, so the controls are now organized in a more logical way from an implementation perspective. Still, you might find out that some of the items are still topic based or functional based. So for example, if you want to implement some of the items on HR level, that implementation or that structure is gone from the 22 version. But to solve that, ISO will hint you to use attributes into the systems, and except for the old approach with the 14 functional organizations, now ISO has implemented in the 2702 version actually some attributes, and some of you might recognize these items from other standards. So first of all, the preventive, detective, corrective actions is in the level of the timing of your incidents. The confidentiality, integrity, and availability is the pure definition of security, but they included also, for example, the cybersecurity concepts, which is actually derived from the NIST with an NIST from the National Institute for Technology in US. That is the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover cycle in that sense. So it's aligning better to other frameworks. You can link up your ISO 27001 implementation on that one. The other link to the old system, to the 27001 version 13, is actually the operational capability. So this is the link, or this is the table that you might find out. It's published in the 2701. Actually, that links up the 2013 versions from the operational capabilities. By the way, there's also a translation table between the different controls and the metrics in that sense, right? And last but not least, you will also see in the 2702 the security domains, which is actually focusing on governance, protection, defense, and resilience. So mapping up other frameworks would make it more easy. But this allows you actually to to be more practical in the implementation of the 2701. So you actually can choose a smart way to implement your systems, right? And this will actually help out from the implementation. Just a quick one, and one of the topics you might be interested in. Sadly enough, the standard itself is published in a PDF version, but it's fairly easy to map up these tables into, for example, an Excel format. And as one of the examples I published over here, if depending on the need of your organization or the customer where you're implementing your ISMS system, you could actually choose one of these mappings, and also check in this way, and this can be also very handy to see which of the items are relevant to the section. So by using these attributes, you can actually filter out, for example, the controls that are applicable to the detect range, or for example the controls that are applicable to your HR department, and this is mapping up actually the new standard to the old ones or to other frameworks. So in essence, if you think smart about it, if you use the new version of the ISO 27001 and of course the 27002, you can actually make your system more practical in many cases in that sense.
Yeah. I think also using and working with the attributes, it will help you detect which relevant parties internally are or need to be involved in implementing your management system. If you look at government's asset management, human resource security, the legal part, you really see which departments or which processes do I need to successfully implement a management system where everybody's involved and not only IT. This 27001 is on the level of your organization, and you need to make sure that the relevant processes and people are involved in implementing and maintaining the ISMS. And these attributes really help you in seeing, okay, who do I need to successfully implement this control?
Good. Yeah, one of the things I get during implementations and during audits, what about these new items? Should we implement a new system? The answer is actually no, because in most of the cases you do have already some protections in place. It needs to be implemented officially, documented officially in that sense. But if you're not implemented in cloud implementations, it's very likely not happening. Many of us, if not all of us, will have the cloud as tool or will be connected to the internet. So you need to think about cyber protection, and of course all of us, even globally, will need to think about privacy and data protection. So there's a huge driver, not only from GDPR, but internationally, lots of privacy legislation, data protection legislation will require you to do so. I've put the physical in brackets because yeah, it was there. The A11 from the old standard was there. You need to provide some physical protection, although that physical monitoring is quite new in the standard. It poses, for some companies, I see some reactions. Do we really need to implement physical protection because our office actually is virtual? We don't have an official office in that sense. So what you could do is, what I will explain in the next slide is also that you could think about it if it's relevant or not, and you could put it in your risk management. Very important, that's a more practical approach. Statement of applicability, as I mentioned, is a mandatory document. The good news is using the mapping tables in the 2702, you could easily extend your SOA referring to the new standard clauses to make sure everything is mapped. So in essence, it should be certainly for documentation fairly easy to move up or to upgrade your system to be compliant with the new standard. And as mentioned before, you have some time to implement. If you don't need physical monitoring, then you should put it in your risk management. So you should, at least you will be forced to analyze it. And if you accept the risk, then you can actually discuss not to implement, for example, the physical monitoring, because if there's no camera, no reason to monitor your office or someone else does it, you could actually explain how it works. But the reason for argumenting this should be in your risk register and your risk treatment plan in many cases.
Important there also is, from our perspective, it's possible that the responsibility lies not with you, but you always have the accountability if the certificate is in your organization. Okay, you can have everything in AWS or Google Cloud or whatever, but that does not take away the accountability that you have for your data that you put on those systems. So it's a bit with physical monitoring, you say, but everything's in a data center. It's their responsibility to check all of that. But you are still accountable because you still put your data there. So you need to look, at least in the contracts, then how they do it and show us that you looked at that.
And certainly for the large players globally, actually it's fairly easy in that sense. Many of them, including Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and all the big players in that sense, will have very likely already the ISO 27001 implements with additional clauses like also cloud security from the CSA approach. So the different frameworks will cover this one. So anyway, it's, as Stefan mentioned, it's very important to check it with your suppliers. In that sense, they take care of it from the physical part too. So that's an important reminder in essence. Good.
Yeah.
What are the next steps, Stefan, for the future?
So the next steps is we're all waiting as certification bodies. When can we certify to this new standards? As I already said, this is a set time frame, 6 months for the accreditation bodies at the maximum to get their stuff done. Then the certification bodies have another 6 months time to get it done. I talked to the product manager at DQS. They expect that we can certify against the new standard still before the summer. Depends a bit on in our case, on DAX, the German accreditation body. We will all be trained, calibrated. We get new audit reports to have all these new controls in. Of course, once a standard changes, we saw it with the 27002, it has an impact on the 27001. Now the 27006, which arranges all of these requirements for the certification bodies, will be impacted. You have other related standards like cyber security techniques, the 27701 for privacy information management systems, and the incident management. So we expect all of these to be updated. They will not have an immediate impact on the process of the certification, but they will get updated, the 27006 for sure, and then the other ones will follow. So that's a bit the next process. I think now everybody can start implementing or transitioning to the new standard, and within 5 to 6 months, we will actually be able to certify against this new standard when the accreditation is ready to allow the certification bodies to move on to the new standard. In any case, there's a transition time of 3 years from the date the standard was published. So you have enough time, if you are currently certified, to transfer to the new standard at any moment that you choose, at the latest 3 years from October of this year.
Yeah, in many cases there will be some commercial pressure, or it signals actually that you're updating your systems by using the new version of the standard. So it's in many cases also commercial interest to get up to speed as soon as possible, of course. So, good. We have added some additional resources also to this slide deck. As mentioned, you can read or re-follow actually the webinar also on the 2702, which is actually discussing on the first publication of the ISO 2701. Also, I discussed actually the updates also in an article you can download. We also provide some additional links via the LinkedIn article, and of course, there are some more additional webinars available also on the PCB website. So if you look for the 2701, so I would advise actually not to search with the ISO code, but just search for the 27001 or the 27002, and you will find some interesting webinars, which is a very nice pack of interested reading and help you out on that one. And again, as mentioned, but you will get the link to that one is also we have provided a link on a page. So also the question and answer that we will get right now, if not answered in these sessions, we will make sure that you get all the questions get an answer in that sense. So Stefan and me, I will actually check on the questions. We will answer them one by one and publish them, so you can read all the questions afterwards, right? As mentioned, and this is a bit of the last part of the course. Of course, have a look at. So PCB, of course, already did an update on the Lead Implementer course. It refers already to the version 2.2. Also, for very interesting, if you want to deep dive on the updated controls, have a look at the 2702 course. So it's updated to the new versions. It's explaining in detail how to implement the new structure of the documentations, and of course, if you want to deep dive on the different various controls, which are very important, the cloud and the cybersecurity implementations in the 27032 or the Cloud Security Manager course will be important. And then, of course, incident management, business continuity, disaster recovery is quite important, and that is actually also added to the slide deck. Right, pretty close to the end of the seminar. Give us a few more minutes for question and answers. So,
yes,
go for it.
Okay, thank you, Peter and Stefan, for delivering this very informative webinar. Just be informed that this session is recorded and it will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Without further ado, we'll just go and answer some couple of questions, and afterwards we'll send the other remaining questions to Peter and Stefan, as Peter already mentioned, and they will answer all of them. Okay, one of the questions from the attendees is how will the changes in ISO 27001 reflect 27017 and 27018?
Are you referring to the 27701?
Or the 17 and the 18?
17, yes, 27017 and 18.
Yeah. First of all, it's referring to the 2702. The topic is being evaluated. I know for now, right now, the 2701 and the 32 are on the list already for review, so it's very likely they will be updated, but it takes a bit of time. On the other hand, please be aware that many of these clauses are shifted from an organizational logical part of that one. So the impact in essence on implementation level is not that big. The controls are still there. They will be consolidated in many cases. So the topics itself are just reshuffled in many cases, which actually minimizes the impact on the 017 and 018 in essence, but of course they will need to be aligned with the new 27002, which they refer to. So for now, I don't have an update on the agenda yet when they will be updated.
No, but they're relatively, the 17 is from 2015, the other one is from 2019. So I think they will at some point get updated, but I don't think they're on the priority list for immediate updates at this point.
On the other hand, I would have a look at the 27100 series. So there is a development going on for cybersecurity in a separate range of standards. So for example, the 27103 will focus even more in depth on the new standards for cybersecurity. So except for the 27018 and 27017, there will be some additional standards for cybersecurity. So that will be integrated. The same reference applies, by the way, for the 29100 series, which is focusing on privacy or data protection. So there will be a separate set of documents or standards for the cybersecurity range.
Okay, thank you, Peter and Stefan. Another question is clause 8.1. What is the difference between outsourced processes and externally provided processes?
Yeah, that's I think we covered in the presentation, so that has been answered. We will make sure also in the responses that we explain it a bit more in detail, but I think that Stefan discussed it quite well, actually, what interpretation is.
The big difference is that an externally provided processes is not only something you outsource, but it also includes, for example, the delivery of a product or hardware or software. It goes broader than saying, okay, I outsource my hosting to a third party, where they are responsible for everything based on my requirements. That was always the discussion. That's why they took it out and made it now really to have everything that you don't do yourself is now externally provided. And that can be not only a service that somebody else does in your name, which is an outsourced process, but also just services and products that you buy as an organization. So they made it a little bit more clear.
So there's a major change in interpretation of delegation or accountability in that sense. In essence, the point here is what I want to make clear is you're still accountable, so you need to take care of everything in that sense. So the responsibility or the accountability is increased. That's an important change.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, another question is, what is the timeline you think will be in place to migrate from the existing ISO 27001-2013 to 2022?
3 years.
Yeah, so it has been talked about during the development of the standards. So initially, the accreditation organization ISO have mentioned 2 years before, but they standardize it to the typical 3 years. So you will have the typical cycle of your certification when it expires, actually to update your system. So you can take your time. Again, you don't have to wait for 3 years if there are some important reasons like commercial, or your update or your certificate is expired within the 3 years. It might be time actually to, for example, to take the next certification cycle or recertification cycle to update your implementation of ISO 27001. Again, in most of the cases, there's not a lot of work in that sense, updating the documentation, updating the evidence. In many cases, the implementation, in fact, is already in place.
Yeah. One important thing a bit related to this question is, okay, if you already have certification now, you have 3 years time. If you're still in the process and are not certified yet, watch out, because the moment the certification bodies are ready to certify to the new standards, you cannot certify to the old one anymore. So around middle of next year, you can only certify to the new one. So if you're still implementing or in an implementation process, watch out. If you do it later than the summer next year, you have to go through the new standard.
Which also means from a documentation level, you need to use the new clauses or align with the new statements. So if you implement the old-fashioned way, you can't certify against the new standard. So make sure you map up the SOA. That's exactly the reason why we mentioned the SOA in that sense. Make the new mapping already in place, make sure it works. So the old mapping will not be valid anymore as soon as the new standard has been accepted and ready for audit. So be careful. Right.
Thank you. Okay, and the last question for today. Do you have any comments, ideas on 6.3, which is not in the table of contents?
That's the change management.
Yeah, in essence, in practice, it should be there. It has not been required as a specific item, but controlling, and it is an essential part of the PDCA. Should have been there over time. In essence, what they ask about is that you think about information security during the management of the system. In essence, there are 3 phases. 3 items or 3 times that you should check about ISMS is, first of all, implementing new services. You should integrate security in the sense changing services, of course, and if there are no changes or new services implemented, you should do regular checks, and that's where also the 6.3 will hook up, is that you think about the changes, you control them, you plan them, and so it's more officially that you should document it about the change management process. You will also notice in the 2702, by the way, that there's a new item. I had it in the list, also mentioned in 11 new items in the 2702. Change management is there. Strangely enough, it was not in the old standard, so they added it now to the capacity management, change management, so it's aligned with ISO 20000, which most of you will know as ETIL. So this is actually the reinforcement of the annex against the 6.3 in that sense. So you will ask to prove control on the change management in that sense. So yes, it's new, but in practice it should be there already.
I think it was great. Notice that it's not in the table of content. I didn't notice it. I looked now, and indeed, I forgot it in the table of content. So there will be a corrigenda coming up to add 6.3 in the table of contents.
So yeah, it's probably a mistake or a typo in purely in the table of contents, because the 6.3 is actually available in the standard. So yeah, well done to notice that one.
Okay, thank you one more time, Peter and Stefan, for delivering this webinar, and thanks to everybody that joined us. Have a great day and evening ahead.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Have a very nice day.
See you next time. Bye-bye.